Inheritance, an Upper Earth novel. Chapter 12, Trials and Tribulations. Deork Fair. It was the name the people of the Devil's Cauldron gave to the castle. Above a great stone wall, two colossal towers blocked the sunlight from Kath's gaze. She had never seen a real castle up close before, and in all the images she'd seen, the towers were always round or square. Here they were many-sided, 6 sides if she had to guess, like hexagons. She remembered the moment Screed said its name. It was when he stopped looking at her. Even now his eyes avoided her. He looked left, right, to the sky or floor, anywhere but at her. He's swimming through a sea of guilt, Kath thought. She hoped he would drown in it. Deork Fair was the Hooded One's palace, he'd told her. If Screed was bringing her here, it was to hand her over to his lord. Or worse, he wanted to sell her life to this Duke Cacophrastus in exchange for a reward. Maybe she should ask him which one it was to be. No, I can't ask. Asking will make it real. Kath thought back to when Screed captured her. I was afraid of him then, but not now. So why don't I run? Deep down she knew why. She feared what lay beyond the sunlit piazzas. On the way to Deork Fair, she'd peered into darkened alleys, wondering which one might be a safe route. Each time she saw lurking shadows or the glint of inhuman eyes. The path Screed chose always followed the sunlight, she soon realised. In the light you were safe. If she ran, there would be nowhere to hide. She glanced at Screed. He's not as tough as he makes out. There's no way he'll sell me out. At worst, he might present her to some stupid lord. I'm not exactly wife material, though. When Screed understands his mistake, he'll take me back to Birmingham. Crowds waited at the castle gates in a queue of sorts. On the far side of the plaza, it began in an orderly line. Closer to the castle, the line disintegrated into a crush of people, resembling a flock of dim-witted sheep, all trying to push through a small space at the same time. Jugglers, flamethrowers, and acrobats entertained them for a few thrown coins, while pickpockets weaved in and out of the press for the coins that weren't thrown. Kath recognised the familiar face of Fingers as he worked his subtle magic around those with fur-trimmed cloaks or jewelled gowns. She examined the people around her with curiosity. Next to her were a mother and son. The woman had obviously dressed in her best clothes, her hand continually creeping up to reposition the bodice of the dress or her hair, while her speech sounded like a market fish seller's. "Stand up straight, Arthur," she scolded. "You have to look good to be a page at court." The boy displayed no signs of wanting to look good. "Don't want to work at court. It's full of monsters, and they'll turn me into a vampire," he shouted, struggling to free himself from his mother's grip. "The biggest monster round here is you, Arthur Biggs. I swear to the Hooded One that if you don't get this job, I'll feed you to the street vampires. Now look lively," she hissed. "There's one of the League passing by. Head up, boy, shoulders back." The crowd divided to allow the passage of a horse-drawn carriage. Its dappled grey horses, decked out with scarlet-red ribbons, and an emblem of a woman embracing a skeleton decorated its door. A slender hand pulled the curtain aside, and Kath caught a glimpse of red lips, long auburn hair, and pale milk-white skin. As the carriage entered the castle, a flash of grey fur scooted between its wheels. A rat too big to be a rat. There was no reason to think it might be the same animal she'd seen in the tunnels. The city probably harboured a whole colony of gigantic mutant rats. By the time Screed and Kath reached the castle gatehouse, the long shadows of the hexagonal towers had grown short. They passed before cloaked guards and under a marble arch that climbed 50 feet above them. Its Roman-style columns supported layer upon layer of sculpted decoration, depicting battle scenes with giants, wolves, and winged creatures. Once across the inner courtyard, they had to undergo the scrutiny of an imperious-looking clerk. He wore a long robe of red with ornate grey embroidery, and a heavy golden chain adorned his neck. Before he'd even spoken, Kath could tell that to this man, Screed held the importance of a very large cockroach. "The hooded one is not available for audience today," he informed them with a look of distaste. "But I've been working under his own personal orders," complained Screed. "I've come a long way. I'm sure the hooded one will see me if you try." "Not today. Return in 3 days' time, and perhaps he will give audience then." The clerk's mouth became a thin straight line, and he turned his attention to the next party in the queue. In frustration, Screed reached out to take his arm. "Look here." "Enough," the man snapped. "If you must see someone, then it will be one of the League of 10. But I warn you, those who wish too great may repent too late." They then had another queue to contend with, before a heavy iron door gave them access to a corridor within the palace. In front were the ambitious mother and the reluctant son. Behind were others of their kind, seeking any opportunity for advancement through the court. Some cases seemed to concern disputes between neighbours or tradesmen, and these led to violent outbursts when the warring parties lost patience during the long wait. Harsh words turned to insults, and insults escalated into fighting. From time to time, these eruptions became so bad that the plaintiffs were thrown out of the palace. The less fortunate were dragged off to the prison cells below. "Poor blighters," murmured Screed, after one such imprisonment. "They'll end up in the amphitheatre, mark my words." "What happens there?" asked Kath. "That's where they put on the Elysian Games," Screed explained. "They pit people against magical beasts. If you survive, you get to go free. Not often you see a survivor, mind." Magical beasts. Kath remembered the Rockwight and the werewolf that had attacked her. Where is the justice in using a wild beast to slaughter a man? They moved at the pace of a tortoise that isn't entirely sure he wants to get to his destination, but the corridor gradually brought them closer to what seemed to be a hearing room, or at least that's what it sounded like from outside. Every few minutes, Kath would hear a haughty voice followed by a resounding bang. It reminded her of a judge reading out a prisoner's sentence before the hammer fell. When Kath finally passed through the intricately carved doors, her fears were confirmed. Inside was a grand courtroom. The hopeful citizens were led into the room in batches of around 30, and once inside they were herded into a wooden enclosure, where they stood squashed together like sheep awaiting sale at market. To one side of the court, people looked on from a number of benches, and at the front, a member of the elite was seated behind a desk that seemed long enough to seat a whole panel of judges, rather than just one. "Who's that?" Kath whispered to Screed. "One of the League," he muttered. "Duke Cacophrastus." Duke Cacophrastus. The name seeped into Kath's head like a poison. This was the man who'd executed girls, just because they could sing. I shouldn't be here, she thought, with panic rising in her chest. She turned back towards the doors, but the guards had closed them until the next batch of people came through. Look, his portrait's up there, Screed continued, seemingly unaware that anything was wrong. She followed his eyes upwards to where enormous paintings covered the upper portion of the walls. There were 10 portraits, one for each member of the League, she supposed. All of the portraits were paired with an emblem on a wooden plaque below. She noticed the one she'd seen on the carriage outside the castle, the woman embracing a skeleton. The Duke's portrait was twinned with a fire-breathing dragon. What had the boy at the inn said about the Duke? There is no more mercy in him than there is honey on a viper's tongue. With growing unease, Kath watched how much the Duke enjoyed the power he wielded. When a farmer came before him, complaining that his neighbour had stolen 2 of his sheep, the Duke asked why he had not stolen 2 sheep in return. Well, I didn't think that would be right, the farmer said, his round face a picture of puzzlement. So you prefer to bring your quarrel here and waste our valuable time for the sake of 2 miserable sheep? Cacophrastus asked. Well, I just thought... The farmer fumbled for the right words, but finding none, fell into silence. A sly smile graced the Duke's lips. For wasting my time, half of your remaining sheep shall be given to your neighbour. He gave a swift rap of his mallet and waved the speechless farmer away. Next! An elegant young woman climbed the steps to the small raised enclosure, where each of the petitioners, plaintiffs or prisoners stood when their case was to be heard. She flicked her long blonde locks onto one shoulder and fixed the Duke with a look, as though she only had eyes for him. In return, the Duke produced a smile that dripped with charm. What may I do for you, young lady? Before she could speak, a clerk spoke up. The prisoner Evelyn Deauville has been accused of stabbing her husband, sire. Indeed. What say you in your defence? Cacophrastus asked of the woman. My husband beat me each time he drank, Duke, the woman sobbed. This time I could take no more. I killed him, 'tis true, but only to defend myself. It is a grave crime to show disrespect to your patriarch, a much graver one to kill him. And yet, what a shame it would be to snuff out such a bright flame as yours. Cacophrastus looked down for a moment, as though in thought. She's a foul creature and deserves a long, slow, painful death, Duke, a voice shouted from the benches where onlookers sat. And who might you be? Cacophrastus demanded. A man stood up, his face flushed with rage. 'Twas my father she killed, that foul creature. In truth, I believe it would greatly benefit the accused to have time to regret her actions. The Duke's head swung back to stare at the accused. What better than a lifetime enslaved to your husband's son? Let him beat you daily, if he so desires. It will help you to recall your place. The mallet hit the block once more. Screed, whispered Kath. We have to leave. Leave? Screed answered, in a low voice. Don't be balmy. It took us half a day to get here. Before Kath could say more, it was their turn to be led to the raised enclosure. A mix of sniggers and guffaws erupted as Screed had difficulty seeing over the railing. A court clerk sought a box for him to stand on. In that moment of awkwardness, Kath felt the eyes of the whole court upon her, as though she too were a prisoner on trial. Those who wish too great may repent too late. By the time Screed was ready to address the court, Duke Cacophrastus drummed his fingers on his chair with impatience. "State your business," he commanded. Screed coughed nervously, and his voice was barely a squeak when he finally managed to speak. "I wish to see the Hooded One concerning a mission," he stuttered. The Duke laughed, and the rest of the court followed his lead. Laughter echoed all around them. "And tell me, what mission could our prince possibly entrust to a snivelling cur like you?" Screed gulped hard before continuing. "He instructed me to seek a wife for him, from up top," he added. The court shook as people stamped the floor, hooting and shrieking with mirth. Yet the Duke wasn't laughing any more. His eyes narrowed, and he stared at Kath with a vicious twist to his mouth. "And is this creature next to you the wife that you deem suitable for our great prince?" His voice was so cold and hateful it made Kath shiver. She looked down at her dirty jeans and leather jacket and felt the itching of her unwashed hair. A flush of heat rose in her cheeks. On every side she saw leering faces and mocking eyes. The Duke continued his diatribe. "From all the beauty that can be found in Upper Earth, you return here with a street urchin who wouldn't even be fit to polish the Hooded One's boots." But sire, she's special. I promise," Screed whined. "When she sings, her voice is like molten honey. When the Hooded One hears her voice, he will want her to be his wife." Kath stiffened. "Screed doesn't know about the executions. He can't know. He wouldn't do this to me." The Duke's blue eyes returned to Kath with vivid interest. Then a movement from the corner of the room caught Kath's attention. A tall, gaunt figure in a plain brown cloak stood up and made his way across the courtroom to Cacophrastus. As he leant down to whisper in the Duke's ear, he glanced in her direction. The court fell into an enthralled hush while the Duke listened. Then, when Cacophrastus looked at her, she didn't see boredom or ridicule or anger. She saw malice in those eyes. When Cacophrastus next spoke to Screed, his voice had altered. No longer did he consider them as insignificant. That much was evident. "Did you not travel through the White Path in these past days?" he barked. "Why, yes, Duke, that's true," said Screed, in obvious confusion. "And is this not the girl who enchanted a Rockwhite with her voice?" the Duke challenged, his voice striking like a clap of thunder. Kath had to find a way of stopping Screed from talking. With a sideways kick, her heel connected with his left leg. "Ow, I mean, yes, sire." "If this girl can enchant a Rockwhite, then she is a sorceress," the Duke said. "It is also common knowledge that one with magical powers in her voice is currently plotting against my own person. I put it to you that this is that very sorceress." "No, sire," Screed whined. "I promise you it's not true." "She is condemned as a sorceress that plots against the League," the Duke announced. Kath's head spun, and the room spun with it. She hung on to the wooden railing to steady herself. How could any of this be true? The faces and noise around her became vague and blurred. Perhaps it was all a dream, and soon she would wake up back in Birmingham. Still, she could hear Screed pleading beside her. "But it's not possible, Duke. This girl had never heard of the League until today. She's innocent." "Silence in court," bellowed a man at the Duke's side. Cacophrastus stood up, making his presence more powerful and dominant for his last words. "This sorceress," he said, pausing for effect, "will be taken from here to the holding cells of the amphitheatre. There she will await the next Elysian Games, where her fate will be decided. If she survives her opponent, she will be set free. At no time will she be permitted to use her voice against the magical beast she fights. Should she disobey this rule, she will be executed on the spot by an arrow to the heart. This is the court's ruling. Guards, take her away." His hand swung in an arc, lifting the small hammer at his side. For a fleeting moment, it hung in midair, like a bird of prey waiting to strike. And when it descended, it was with such force that the noise vibrated through Kath's body. The hands of the guards gripped her arms as they hauled her from the stand. Her hands were bound together, the binding serving as a leash to drag her towards the door. Still she could hear Screed's voice behind her. "Please, Duke, she's just a girl. It's all a big mistake." "Clerk, pay this man the reward for handing over the traitor," Cacophrastus said. "Yes, sire," said the clerk with a nod of the head. Then he shouted, "Court is adjourned until tomorrow." The room was in uproar. The waiting crowd exploded with discontent at the closure of the court. Screed's wailing floated over that of the crowd and incited it further. Kath looked one last time over her shoulder to see guards carrying Screed's struggling body out of the courtroom. Then Kath could hear Screed no more. She finally gave in to her emotions as the guards dragged her away through another door. Tears blurred her vision and streamed down her cheeks.